So I've been thinking about kind of identity in public spaces and the balance between anonymity, privacy, and usability, and having a good public conversation and engaging in the public sphere for, roughly since like 2010.
Hi, my name is Zara Dana, and I'm the head of data science at Snickerdoodle Labs. So I'm coming from a more technical background. So my previous position was in deep learning and AI, and I've built multiple AI systems to perform classifications. And prior to that, I worked in the compliance and Web2, so privacy from that perspective. And that's how I think my current role kind of marries the two interests that I had in my previous life. And I look forward to the conversation about the various different facets of identity in Web3 today.
My name is Ben DiScipio. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Bloom Protocol. We are a decentralized identity platform. We've been around for a long time. Actually, since 2018 was when our mobile app was released. We have over 1 million installs on that app, and we have live use cases using our technology in foreign governments. We've worked with BMW, Amex, and other large institutions to implement and test the technology. And now we recently released a product called OnRamp, which is for all of the rest of the businesses in DeFi, and solves a very particular need in DeFi, and we can kind of talk about that later. I come to the space from investment banking, so what's interesting is that I'm well aware of regulation and how onerous it can be on traditional finance, and I know how regulators think, and I think that that's helpful for us to kind of take a look at what we expect to come down the pike having to do with identity and DeFi, which is going to be a difficult nut to crack. And I certainly stand with you on the privacy issue. That's really important to us, and frankly, that's what makes our solution really interesting for the market.
Awesome. Well, we'll jump right in. So kind of at a high level, why should we care about identity as sovereign identity in Web3?
At the end of the day, going back from, I'm going to take this from a 10,000 foot view, but identity is, the beginning of all philosophy. Who am I? And how do I interact with other people? Go on Unix. Who am I? Identity in computing is important. Identity in society is important. Proving who you are, having a sort of social reputation, people being able to interact with people that who will be able to act with predictably because you have an experience with them, as opposed to entirely dealing with anonymous people without consequence. Our society is based on reputation and consequence and empathy for the other. So I don't think we'll truly be able to develop social technologies that people can actually live in and be able to accomplish real things in until we have a good answer to identity, even if it looks radically different than what we have today.
I think the other aspect of this is in the physical world right now, we all have different identities in different places. So I'm a different person here up on the stage, but my experience with my parents are probably different, definitely different. But somehow in Web2, we forgot about that. Somehow we allowed Google and Meta to track us across the internet, and we're pretty much are presented with the same experience across different websites. And I think this has to change, just from a user's experience point of view. Maybe not every single day I want to be presented with the same exact ads. Meta knows that my demographic and knows where I live, and it kind of has an understanding of, oh, this person is probably interested in skincare and anti-aging creams. So let's just show her, exploit that information and just show her as many ads as possible in that space, which is, I bought my cream already, so I'm good. I don't need more creams. After the 20th ad, I'm done. So leave some room for exploration. I think the exploration right now, the way it's done, if you go on a search engine, it's pretty much blind. They provide you with suggestions that you may be interested in, and they track how you respond to those suggestions. Now, coming from an AI background, there's actually a concept of exploration and exploitation, like how much a search engine will explore and how much it will exploit the information it has about you. But going back to an individual perspective, I think in the Web3 and in the metaverse, we need to be in control of how we want our experience to look like, and not let the platforms tell us who we should be and what we should like. From a freedom perspective, but also from when you think about like teenagers and what this means for them, and people who may not be as analytical, we are letting these brands like shape our thinking and shape who we are. So I think that's actually not ethically correct in many ways.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You mentioned reputation and consequence. That caught my ear. I mean, reputation and consequence; those are the things that are missing right now from DeFi, and that's the part of this difficult nut to crack. And as for what you were saying, I think you're 100% right. But the question is it a feature or is it a burden? Right? Is it intrusive or is it what people want? And I think that's kind of an open question, because we all want, kind of an evolution of the AI around what our identity is that can automate more things for us, right? So when you see those things, do you think, well, this is intrusive, that they know these things about me? Or do you say, well, I'm really glad that I can actually look at ads for things that I'm interested in, as opposed to ads for just junk. And I think that, there is a fine line there. And I think you're 100% right, because it does move into privacy, because it is very intrusive. But do we want it or do we not? And do we have opt-in? Do we have a choice there?
Let's keep talking about the reputation and consequence, especially for when we're considering like project leaders. So not long after the Luna crash, it was found out that Do Kwon was also behind Basis protocol, and in a way, the ability to stay anonymous behind projects and then kind of hit the reset button with a new identity, new pseudonymous identity, allows you to also kind of go do other crazy things. So how to reconcile identity for people who are putting out these projects that might be, transacting billions of dollars at some point? How do you reconcile that with responsibility and accountability to their end users? Thinking on that kind of spectrum.
So one of the most interesting things I saw on Twitter, kind of answering this question, and I wish I could remember who said it, but what we need to do is publish an NFT children's book that contains morality stories about the bad actors in Web3. Basically, like, if you don't build a culture around these are bad actions and these are good actions, so kind of like keeping a reputation of villainy. I don't know. It was just
Blacklist?
this idea. Yeah, well, blacklist is a strong term, and technologically, I don't like that, but it's more of a cultural thing. So how do we kind of, is that cancel culture? Is that, something else? But like, how do we culturally reward the good and like punish the bad? And that's like, a tale as old as time in terms, look at like chivalry, Middle Ages and Dark Ages, morality tales. Like, who are clearly what is bad behavior and what is good behavior? Because if we don't kind of come around a good behavior and idea of like how it's okay to act in society, you're going to get a very, tragedy of the commons situation.
Historically, do you think that kind of approach generally works? Do you think that people behave because they're in a children's storybook?
I think very fundamentally, people generally either conform or reject whatever the prevailing morality or norms are. Like, so one of the things I always think about is how, people complain a lot about cancel culture, but it doesn't really feel any different than, in the 1800s, if you showed a shoulder, that's, very, like, we have differing changes of like what is moral and what is normal and how do you act in society, and everything is either I belong with it, or I'm rejecting it and reacting it and moving on to the next morality.
Morality and identity. How do we get that on DeFi?
Cool. Any other thoughts on the reconciliation of accountability, maybe legal accountability, and the ability to also just kind of keep repeating a new identity and
I mean, I think we were talking earlier about, I think that there are a couple of layers. We've talked about things like the identity stack and others that are a layer that is more presentational, right? So you've got one layer at the bottom that is a true layer of identity. And my feeling is that each person or entity or natural person should be just a single identity at the core layer. But then presentationally, you can have as many as you want, and they can be really interesting. They could be AI presentational identities. They can behave in odd ways, as long as while you're interacting with finance, you have a core identity that somehow is brought into that equation.
So you think that when like in terms of accountability, your true identity is the one that is held accountable, and the rest are just like the fun parts of it?
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
So there's always a base layer of like, okay, if you do X, you're gonna get, you're gonna face the consequences. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. On that, let's jump into regulation a little bit. So Caitlin Long thinks that there will be three camps of DeFi or crypto going forward, of folks who are completely anti-regulation, do everything under the radar, don't talk to regulators, pro-regulation to get access primarily to mainstream markets and just more liquidity for more volume. And then the third camp is working proactively with regulators to account for just new innovation and all the new types of things you can do in DeFi, quadratic funding, you name it. And that would be the camp to work with regulators to get that across. So do you agree first with that assessment that those three camps, and then how do you think about those factions in crypto related to identity?
So there's no love regulators category, like a fourth category. We love regulators. Generally, people don't fall into that bucket, but yeah.
I mean, if that's a fourth one, if you think that's there, then
well,
yeah.
It's interesting because I was thinking about that earlier when I was reading through those three, and I generally agree with those buckets. I think most people here probably fall into the first, but there is that idea of a fourth bucket of people that actually, and I wouldn't say love regulators because I don't think anyone does. Well, I don't mind regulators, really, if you're watching. There are people that feel very comfortable with the rails that regulation provides, and they don't feel comfortable when there is none, because when like in the DeFi environment right now, where there are so few rails, it can be very difficult. I mean, yesterday at our regulation panel, one of the people in the audience was asking, what's the proper way to set up a DAO so that I'm safe? And I mean, the answer is, I don't know. I don't know that you're ever going to be safe, because I think that eventually they're going to find some way to address you. How they address you is a different thing. And why should they address you? That's a different topic entirely. But right now, it's very difficult for an entrepreneur to come into DeFi and make certain decisions and have any type of certainty. And, most businesses, I think, like to have as much certainty as they can. So certainly on the compliance side, I think a lot of compliance officers like to work with regulators because they can understand what they need to do. And that is a very comforting position for them. So I think there is a conceivable fourth bucket. It's likely not users, but certain entrepreneurs.
I would say from my side, I worked in bank-to-bank communication for a while for like tier 1 financial institutions. And there, regulation is very comforting. Like people who have incredible power over our lives, who through one message versus another can just kind of bypass our laws very easily. Regulation can be very comforting. So I'm in a kind of weird place from a technological and ideological perspective, from a self-sovereign identity. I'm very, libertarian, anti-regulation. I would like to be able to engage with technology however I see fit, and that's how everyone should be able to do it. On the other hand, having seen regulation, especially on these like large problems that impact the common good, lack of regulation could very well be argued to be a leading cause for the '08 financial crisis. So people that can be bad actors or dumb actors, not realizing that they're, again, coming to a tragedy of the commons. Everyone's just fighting to get a little bit of profit in a way that can destabilize an entire system. It's good to have a little bit of regulation there.
Yeah, I think when it comes to identity, given how like not well defined the spaces, I think many of the like entrepreneurs would probably fall into the third category. And I do agree with the breakdown of like people who don't like regulations. They probably don't want to have an identity online. They want to be completely anonymous. The second group are like sort of the lovers of regulations. They are probably...
You're not saying that I'm a lover.
And they love having identities. They want to have KYC and AML and all of that. And give me more. I like KYC very much. But the third category are people who are like educating the regulators, are the people who want to have the regulators help them to be more innovative and have the space defined with the help of the regulators. And I think given how like early stage we are in the identity in Web3, and probably the conversation we are having today in 2 years will not even be, we're not going to be having the same conversation anymore. Things are evolving so quickly. I think many people will fall into the third category.
And I'd just like to jump in. So we can talk about people who are on the compliance side. We can talk about people who are entrepreneurs. We can talk about people who are like tech ideologists. But at the end of the day, the space is probably going to be defined by end user preferences. And overwhelmingly, end users say that they care more about usability than they do about security and privacy. I mean, we see this across, what's the adoption for WhatsApp versus Signal, or what's the adoption for really any technology. And I come from this I used to do product analytics in Web2, and people like usable products, and that's not a deep and insightful statement, but people are going to prioritize usability over kind of vague ideological concerns about a space more than anything. So I think, it's on us to educate people on why they should care. But at the end of the day, the adoption is going to be driven by end users and whatever they find most beneficial for their own life.
Yeah, so you're saying people are going to compromise privacy for usability?
I don't think they're even going to compromise because they don't care.
We have in the past.
You think that users are going to trump regulators in terms of where the space ends up? Because I would differ with that.
I don't think they're going to trump regulators. I think that users are probably going to prefer a more stable system where they won't mind regulation, though there's probably going to be a lot of outside information telling them that regulation is a bad thing, as there are in most industries.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain there. There's certainly going, there's a pain moment. The moment people start to accept the entrance of any type of known identity component that is part of their DeFi interactions. But I think, some type of that is necessary long term. I think that, thinking that governments are going to be okay with, this whole system that looks and smells like an investment, and that's really the SEC's whole point, right? If it walks like a duck, it's a duck. It sure looks like it, but really different components, really different internals, really different interactions that, coming from the traditional financial space, taking that set of regulation and putting it on this, it's no way that it could happen. It's not feasible. But to think that it's not going to come at all, especially for things just as simple as money laundering and keeping bad actors out, I think that that's going to be at a baseline level. And so I think the question for the industry is, okay, so how do we best evolve to that point when it comes, in a way that continues to capture the anonymity or pseudonymity of the space? And I think that is definitely possible. As I talked about this core identity and a presentational identity, I think that people can enjoy the freedom that those presentational identities can represent to them, and at the same time, the regulators can be sure that that person isn't on a sanction list or something like that.
I think from a product perspective, we're going to see a split on how people use things. The end user who engages, who only is for, number go up, who, engages with some sort of investment platform with an expectation that their money's going to be there in 3 months and that they're not going to have the rug completely pulled under their feet, they're going to welcome regulation. They're going to want a way of, okay, something goes wrong, I can get my money back, and there's some good faith here that this product's going to exist in a couple of months, and I know it's happening behind the scenes. I think the end user who, one of the really interesting things about DeFi and this whole space of Web3 is community ownership and governance tokens. And so the role that governance tokens play in DeFi, I think people are really going to want to respect their anonymity in being able to, engage in pre-DAOs, in engaging with community ownership, and they're going to want to be able to maintain their anonymity on that and still get governance tokens and be able to engage in governance protocols. But there's always the aspect of how does that governance protocol, and especially the governance token, play into DeFi and being able to, do swaps, being able to make exchanges. And I think people are going to want the anonymity and deregulation on that side, but anytime that they're engaging with something that feels more like a financial institution,
right,
that's where they're going to want the regulation.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. I think plenty of users of Celsius probably wish that it had been regulated at the time, because those kind of things don't happen. They're just because the regulators don't generally allow it to happen, but they'll also soften the fall, and they'll make sure that they'll come in earlier to make sure that, at least, the damage is mitigated.
I think people who bought their 5th home in Florida in 2007 loved deregulation until their loans went bottom up.
Do you think they're, if we're running under the assumption that usability trumps privacy now, what do you think that most consumers feel is the risk or perceived risk to their identity in Web3? And if they see that increasing, from regulators or however they perceive it, do you think that can kind of flip? And especially in certain, maybe not the US, but other countries where that would galvanize the use of more hey, I really will only use Signal, or I will really only transact privately no matter what, and they'll sacrifice a lot to do those things.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're juxtaposing usability and privacy. I don't think that one necessarily has to come without the other. And I think that people are interested in privacy. Generally, we're decentralized identity. I think selling decentralized identity to a retail population is very easy. People get very excited about it. People like. There's a reason why we have 1 million installs on our app. It's because it speaks directly to privacy. People have been, subject to hack after hack after hack after hack. And, the sad thing is that we've almost become immune to it. We hear it and we're like, all right, whatever. You get it. You get an email that you've been part of another hack. Well, what's another one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, there's so much PII that we share every single day. It's mind-boggling. And we do it so easily. And yeah, maybe it has a great user experience. We're enjoying what we're doing, but we don't realize that we're essentially putting out the risk of of, having our identities stolen every single day.
Well, and going back to your point earlier about how people engage with AI, and what is being served to me. Like, so one of the things that's most exciting for me from Web3 on a decentralization perspective is being able to separate your identity for how you engage with different platforms. Like, how much is, and I'm going to blank on the name of the company here, but John Oliver on Last Week Tonight did a whole thing on how buying and reselling of data. So being able to access people's, what did they do on this site, and companies in the background that tie your IP to your email address, to your Facebook. So you think that you're engaging with all these websites with different identities and not sharing any information with yourself, but there's people in the background who are bundling all this information together to be able to serve you targeted ads and to be able to like look at your credit history and get all this information at you behind. So what makes me excited about the space is being able to easily spin up new identities, hopefully in a way that will make it harder for people to track. Because I think people want the benefits of AI, but they want it to be more personalized and self-sovereign, as opposed to AI that is like specifically trying to separate money from my wallet to get me to buy things.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. I think, there's a lot of good points that you covered there. One is, like, as an individual, I like to stay in control of, like, sometimes I just feel like I wish there was a toggle that I could turn off, or maybe just explain what I want it to be what I want the website to present to me, and then just maybe go with that identity. But I don't have that choice right now in Web 2. I'm just pretty much limited to, or bound to what information they have about me. And a lot of times I don't even know what that information is, which is the scary part. Like, what if I don't want to be that person anymore? What if, like, I want to change? They're not going to let me.
Let's get into the foxholes with each of your prospective products a little bit more, just so we can kind of get an understanding of how you're thinking about it. So let's start with Zara and Snickerdoodle. So when you're thinking about like building up your own ownership of your data, how does that look like from Snickerdoodle's, like how they're putting it together? How does it work? And then what is the kind of pitch to the brands, or like how are they thinking or requesting to figure out how to use this data for their own benefit?
So the problem that Snickerdoodle is solving is pretty much the same problem that we've been talking about. So individuals would like to be in control of their own identity across the internet, across the Web3. And but they want to do it and not without having to have their privacy compromised. So in Snickerdoodle, we're pretty much building three things. There's an open protocol, and there is the data wallet, which allows the users to connect their data off-chain, on-chain, and store it in a secure manner. The user would then be able to grant specific informed consent to brands and projects that they want the data to be shared with. So once this permission is granted, then the brand can reach out to at different touch points and say, hey, so would you be willing to, for example, tell me where you live? And in exchange for this data, the brand will be compensating the user. And these are all facilitated by the protocol.
So does the brand, so like, let's say I'm, shopping on a direct to consumer site, does the brand have to have something installed? Like kind of from a user's point of view, like, are they signing it through a MetaMask? Like, I permit you to see this part of my cookie history or my other wallet data. Like, how does it interact between the user and the brands, I guess?
Yeah, no, great question. So on the brand side, that will be our SaaS product, which is built on top of the protocol. And it gives the brands the ability to, first of all, create these consent contracts, have the consent contracts, I guess, integrated with their UX and UI, but also design compensations that are interesting enough. And then lastly would be to collect this data. We don't really call it data, we call it insights, because they actually never are able to like zone in into an individual and see an individual's data point. They always have this, they have access to the aggregation of data, or the insight, and they're like dashboards and reports they can use for decision making processes. Yeah.
We'll go over to Bloom. So Bloom has a considerable amount of stakeholders in the ecosystem. And per the website, there's the primary customers of enterprise, developers, and consumers. What are you seeing as the primary needs of each one of these consumers? And then how are you reconciling all of them for the end product and ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's evolving, and I think it depends on which product you're looking at, because what we've built essentially is much larger than what we're selling it as right now, because obviously once you have a decentralized identity and you're surrounding that with verifiable credentials that can represent everything from your KYC and sanction screens to your credit score, your financial data points. It can represent, on our platform, we have credentials that represent two-factor authentication confirmation in Google, in Twitter, in Facebook, and in LinkedIn. A company can actually add those to the list of things that they're adding for compliance, just to be sure that that person is who they say they are. But then in addition to that, there's limitless potential in the areas of health and in things like TSA. I'm really anything that surrounds an individual, anything that they own, whether it's a license or it's a certification for work, a degree, job history, all of that can be recorded as credentials. So it's a vast array of potential areas. What we're focused on right now is DeFi. And the reason why we're focused on DeFi is because DeFi has a problem that needs to be solved. And that is that they need to allow identity to enter the process without disturbing the needs of the space. And right now, the needs of the space are to be anonymous or pseudonymous. They like to operate that way. They would like to continue to operate that way. And our platform actually offers a solution for that. So we can actually pass compliant users directly to smart contracts on chain without passing any PII at all. Not their name, nothing. Just their wallet address. That wallet address is attached to somebody who has been KYC'd, according to this process, has passed your entire compliance program, not on any sanction screen lists, and maybe we can even throw in, and they have a credit score above 700, and their annual salary is over $100,000. And all of those components can actually be passed and filtered to whitelist compliant and qualified users directly to the smart contract on chain without passing any information at all.
And you're the only one visible to that info when you, as the end consumer, when you're setting up your profile. There's no visibility of anyone else can see that except for just the purposes of qualifying your profile to use.
Correct. Actually, no one can see it. Not even Bloom can see it. So, I mean, it's owned by the user. They choose at every moment whether they want to share it or not. So if they're applying to something that's DeFi related, they can swipe to share or they cannot. I mean, the other great thing about this kind of technology is that these are reusable credentials. So, we talked about the proliferation of PII because we're proving who we are multiple times every single day. When we go to a store to buy a bottle of wine, we're proving that we're 21 years old, that it happens every single day. This concept of being able to prove who you are a single time beyond any doubt that you are the person that you say you are, and having those sanction screens run, now you can just go and share that anywhere. And the receiving company can be just as secure as if they had received and asked for all of that PII, and then they have to find a way to deal with it. So it's a really attractive solution for everybody, but specifically for the DeFi space, because what it allows people to do is to continue to operate anonymously or synonymously with DeFi apps, dApps, without sharing PII and being compliant. It solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's interesting because another part of it is you really just share what you need to share. So you share, oh, yes, I am older than 18, but you don't need to know my age.
Exactly. Like some DeFi projects are actually going to take data, and what we do is we match the data, the metadata that gets sent to them, against the verified data, so that they know that it's right. Maybe it's entered by the user or otherwise, and they're only sharing and only taking that PII, which they absolutely must for whatever their purposes are, and that's disclosed very clearly to the user.
Well, and so this is where I think like regulation versus incentive structures, especially in existing tech, kind of get into some interesting things. So I used to work in analytics, and in analytics, every company that engages in any sort of analytics is incentivized to collect as much data as they can about you, because that's how the technology is built. Like there's no other option. If I want to be able to see what you've done and how you've engaged with my product, and I want to be able to send you timely notifications, and I want to be able to optimize my product, I don't really have options to do that anonymously or pseudonymously. I have to collect as much information as I can about you in order to build a like product that people actually want to use. Like their users expect a certain level of personalization. They expect a personalization in their messaging that they get, and they want a product that's going to be adaptive to their needs. I think so at IDriss, we allow users to be able to connect a phone number, Twitter account, email address, other offline identifiers to their one wallet or any number of wallets that they want. So one of the features that we're building here is an notification integration, so that I can get off-chain notifications for on-chain events. So I can get a text about something that happens on-chain. One of the nice things about the way that we're building this is that the end company, the data provider, the messaging service, doesn't need to collect your email address. All you need to know about me is my wallet address, and send out the notification, and then there's an address book, and that resolves and gives them the notification. So right now we're changing the incentive structure, because what's now possible in the technology, the self-sovereignty of my identity, I say I allow myself to be contacted this way, but I can turn off that stream, I can turn off this stream. It's not that you have my email address, it's that you have my wallet and can contact me because I allow it.
That's a really so that's all on IDriss, basically, that you get your off-chain notifications through your email. It's email, phone number, or Twitter handle.
Yeah, exactly. So and right now, so we're in the process of building a couple of open source integrations with other projects. So projects that handle the messaging side. So either wallet to wallet messaging or getting notifications in wallet. We're working with them to build that bridge, so that again, just to work, so other companies don't have to access that off-chain PII about you.
So your client would be using you to message their client, correct?
Our smart contract.
Okay. All right.
And all they have to do is send out the notification with the wallet, which is already being collected, which someone has subscribed to, without having to give anything else other than my wallet address.
And I assume you have a mechanism in place that users can like say, oh, I no longer want to be contacted. Can you take me off of?
Yeah, well, and so there's a sharing of API credentials that the user can shut down, and we're kind of exploring other mechanisms for giving data or notification providers NFTs as access to, which are revocable.
So that was, and that leads us into the question I had for you, Karl. The value prop's extremely simple. Pen your email, Twitter, or phone number to your wallet address, but by nature that automatically makes your identity very transparent with your on-chain activity. So how, I guess, like, how do you view that for a lot of people, I would imagine, don't want that, but except it's also very convenient to be like, oh, I can send Ben $20 of ETH through his email. So how do you kind of reconcile that from IDriss' point of view?
Well, and so not only from a usability perspective, not only could I send you, $20 worth of ETH to your email, I could send my mom $20 worth of ETH to her phone number, even if she doesn't have an account yet, because we hold it on chain until someone connects their existing wallet or spins up a new wallet and it claims it. So for us, there's a big usability side on mass onboarding. So people can airdrop to a large amount of Twitter followers and allow people to claim their NFTs, claiming that. So
you're a payment system as well?
Yes. So
Interesting.
payments, kind of helping enterprises with their NFT strategy. We also have some kind of DAO tooling and pre-DAO reputation. So being able to track. So one of the things that we look at is we haven't integrated GitHub yet, but being able to reward people for their open source GitHub contributions. But also, if I come to a Twitter space right now, if I want to prove that I was there, community managers say, all right, everyone claim your POAP, here's the link. It's very opt-in right now. So we're allowing people to do, as someone engaged in community governance, getting actively rewarded.
Massively simplifying just the transactability of anything that's on chain.
Yeah, and so
great.
I'll say
Yeah.
one of the big things with us is, we've been going to a lot of conferences all summer, and I'll say 1 in 20 people goes, no, I don't want my email, phone, or anything tied to my wallet. Like, I very much care about my privacy. And then the 29 other people that we talk to go, oh my gosh, this is great. This is more usable. We can onboard people into the space. And my answer to people who don't want their phone or any of their off-chain identifiers connected to their wallet is have multiple wallets. Like, there's not going to be a way that you can't engage with Web3 or the metaverse without exposing some level of identity. And you should probably have multiple wallets, one for your like large amounts of coin that you have, one for engaging socially, one for engaging in memes, one for engaging, if you're going to do wallet to wallet messaging, you're going to have to expose some level of information about yourself. And people are going to want to be able to interact with people that they know off chain. So we need some way of findability. Cause I used to work in bank to bank messaging. You need verified off chain identity, and you need to be able to be easily findable for the product to be used.
I'm going to switch back to the audience really quick. Got another poll question. So whenever somebody downloads a new app, when you have the option to ask app not to track, who presses ask app not to track? Pretty much everybody, right? Yeah. So Apple threw a torpedo with that update to Facebook, Google, everything else with their effectiveness to actually target us. So, a win for privacy. So let's take that analogy a little bit to Web3 and assume everything is private by default. Everything that we have is private by default. What use cases do you think that people will start opting into most to give away a little bit of their data to engage with whatever? Like what trends do you think we'll see in the next 2 to 5 years?
I'll also just say those settings don't prevent you from being tracked. They prevent your tracking being tied to your identity, which is like there's a pretty key differentiation in that.
Right. My apologies. But yeah, trends that people, again, assuming private by default, what are we going to opt into in the next 1 to 5 years for services, needs, anything on DeFi protocols? Yeah.
So with the adoption of technologies such as the Snickerdoodle and the data wallet, so the future that I imagine is this whole, I guess, potential compromise of privacy for usability will no longer be in anyone's mind, because you will be able to have the best of both worlds. You can have the personalized experience across the web, but also really not have to reveal. I'm not talking about DeFi for financial purposes. Qualifying for a loan is slightly different, but in terms of experience across different websites, I think you don't necessarily need to trade off your identity or anything, but it still can enjoy the same personalized experience.
I think it's a great idea. This idea of making your use of your data self-sovereign. I think that's wonderful. And I think that certainly as a user, I would love that opportunity. I know, Apple protects you a little bit, right? And some sites will give you, Facebook gives you a little bit of control, but really not. We all know. I think it would be wonderful to have kind of a single interface that could work with all of them and selectively say what you wanted them to do for you. Because if indeed they're going to be features, let's make them be user selected features instead of features that are thrust upon us.
I think one of the interesting things that I'm closely tracking the space. I don't know how it's going to go, but various places of user-to-user lending. So something along the line where if I have an off-chain identity or an on-chain identity that has a lot of reputation tracked for, I've engaged in DAO governance on this protocol, and I've been on this pre-DAO protocol, and people know me as an active contributor across multiple projects, and then someone decides to give me a loan based on that. Outside of kind of a larger institutional, it'll be interesting how people can do their not one true identity. Nothing based on a credit score. All you know about me is that I show up to protocols, I actively participate in projects, and I have a good sense of reliability on delivering through on what I say I'm going to do. If there's a way of kind of tracking that good online behavior, you might be able to separate out different aspects of what your identity is. Like, who cares that you took out a big student loan in 10 years ago and haven't been able to repay it and haven't been able to make rent? But if I, in good faith, show that I'm a good actor online, people might be willing to lend to me on a more user-to-user basis outside of kind of institutions.
You think?
Maybe.
Really? They haven't paid back their student loan and they're not paying their rent?
I think people might be willing to not look at that and look at other indications of reliability.
Yeah, and there definitely are, and we were talking about it earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole idea of a future credit, I think it takes into account a lot more. But I still think that whether you pay your rent and whether you have loans that you've defaulted on, those are always going to be material, I think, to a certain extent, unless we're talking about something that really isn't a money-making enterprise. I think that we're talking about privacy. I'd like to ask a question to the audience. Those people that said that they wanted to interact within DeFi privately, are you doing that, and do you want to continue doing that so that the IRS can't see what you're doing? How many? Raise your hand.
Anonymous, yes.
One? Yeah. Oh, so we've got an anonymous yes. And the rest of you are no for other reasons. Other reasons? No one's putting their hand up.
It's hard to see. I see hands.
It's an interesting interesting dilemma because there's a question whether we have the right to remain private to our government. And there's whether we have a right to a store of wealth that can't be seen. Not that hasn't been around for a very long time in different ways, right?
Art and gold.
Yeah, exactly. But they keep trying to find it, right? They keep trying to find ways to get to it, and I think that I think that if we're trying to be private and anonymous for reasons other than trying to hide what we're doing from the government, either because it's nefarious or because we don't want to report it, I think that we will continue to be able to do that. I don't think the government has any concerns with that necessarily. I think they just want to make sure that people, aren't doing bad things.
Well, and I think there's a fundamental dichotomy between who am I trying to hide this from? Like, on my personal level, I'm very, I like taxes. I like public infrastructure. I like public good. I believe that people should pay, a healthy tax structure to pay for public goods.
Not me.
So I'm not trying to, ideologically different on that. But I don't want AWS, Facebook, Twitter, any of these companies having access to my data. I am much more skeptical about the ad industry and how tech has centralized around ad tech than I am about trying to. So I am much more interested in hiding myself from the large existing centralized institutions than I am about hiding myself from the government because of, predatory practices in capitalism.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, when you think about it, some of these companies are so giant now that they have probably more control than some of the sovereign governments, given how much data they have access to. And also, I think it's not true for everyone, but some of these companies, given the system-wide breaches and like having to spend like millions of dollars to comply with privacy regulations, some are starting to think maybe we don't need to be collecting all this data if there is another way, but there hasn't been another way until now.
Well, and at this stage of my life, big tech companies have way more control over my day-to-day actions than government does. Like I fundamentally, Instagram, like the classic example of, oh, Facebook, Meta, whatever, must be tracking what I'm saying because I was just talking about this and then an ad popped up for it. They don't realize that these algorithms have been shaping their brain for the last week and a half to prime them to be thinking about buying this thing. Like, it's not having an original thought and saying it. It's these algorithms have fundamentally shaped my brain because of all the information they have about me to make me think about buying this.
Very true.
So that actually brings up an interesting point. So this one's for Zara as head of data science at Snickerdoodle. One of the biggest leverage points of these centralized companies is that they have centralized data sets to train their models on much more rapidly than anything in decentralized world could, like at least against public data. So what leverage points does DeFi industry or Web3 have when it comes to AI, ML, and like finding the insights that would be appealing to brands, or what are our AI allies in this space?
Well, historically, the way machine learning and all these algorithms were developed was by pretty much collecting whatever they could get their hands on and putting it into big databases. And then, I mean, I've been on the other side of the table, so I know. You pretty much have access to this like wealth of data for free, and you train various different models, customer retention, loan qualification, customer targeting, marketing, advertising, you name it. But this is going to change when users are more sovereign and they have actual control over their data. When data exists on users' devices, I can't run or train ML models as easily. I can still do it. There are distributed ways to train models, and that's what we're trying to do at Snickerdoodle. It's a lot more challenging, but it's also a lot more ethical. So we're giving the users to participate and also compensating for them for their contribution to this model.
Going back to DeFi and identity and morality and talking about ethics. So when I was in college, I was writing my thesis on how people engage in political movements on online social networks. And the problem is, if you're doing social network analysis, what's the data set? Where do you get a data set that isn't pure PII? And it's really hard to access data sets. So you've got these fantastical algorithms in your head that seem, like you want to research them and you want to prove them and you want to train them, but what do you run them on? I was thinking, don't know if everyone remembers Cambridge Analytica and the big thing there. When I was a junior in college, I would have traded my left arm to get access to that data set. I wouldn't have thought for a second. Afterwards, as the hearings are coming out and after information about how it's being used, I started thinking, I should probably have a morality about how I collect this data and how I train it. But as an academic researcher, you don't necessarily, you're so excited to get the access to the data and to be able to run your models. So how do you think about kind of the emerging side of the rising of the ethics on that? Or does the technology in Web3 just force us to be more ethical?
And do people owning their own data then take that data away from you and you have less to be able to analyze? And how does that make your job more difficult?
Yeah, no, good questions. I mean, I don't have solid answers for any of them really, but I know from experience, I mean, I expect to get some sort of pushback from the brands, because you're pretty much taking away something they had access to for free for many, many years. And it was gold. It's just so valuable. And yeah, I do expect a pushback from brands in that aspect.
In that way, data is like drugs, right? They can corrupt because they're so appealing. There's a dangerous side to that, and there's an exciting side to that. There are two sides that are there at the same time always, and that always makes it difficult to traverse.
I could keep going on these topics for a whole nother hour, but I know we're already pushing up against time, so I wanted to leave the last 10 minutes for questions from the audience. I don't know if there's a mic to pass around, or or just, it's a small room,
Yeah.
Test. Hi, I'm Trey. I work in space, and it seems like we have kind of like competing ideas up here about how identities should function online. So you mentioned you're primarily interested with Bloom right now, I guess, in finance, and you said there should be an underlying identity layer, like a core foundational identity layer, very different from tying any email to a wallet address, and a little bit different from tying an email to more of an e-com retail use case. How do you think this difference is going to play out in the market? Because there's many identity providers trying to do this, and I feel like they're all going to run up against each other, and it's going to be this adoption question. And so, any predictions for how this is going to go?
I think that's a great point, and it's actually something that I wanted to hit on earlier, and I didn't, and that has to do with open standards. So when we originally released our mobile app, there was a lot of proprietary stuff in there that we created developer tools for, so that developers could then develop solutions on it. But we switched to the W3C standard of verifiable credentials and the DID standard, which is W3C, because ultimately you're right. There aren't as many providers as you might think that there are. There are a lot of providers that have a website up, and there are a lot of providers that actually go around saying that they want to do something, but there are very few that actually have real products. And I know this because I do market research on a continual basis, and we're desperately trying to find somebody who will let us use their product. Whereas our product is right out there, has always been right out there. But it's not even necessarily just about Bloom. What open standards do is it allows the elements that you've collected in whichever identity company you chose to participate in, and their little ecosystem that gets set up where you can share between all of those credentials can then be used by other people that participate in the same open standards. That's really a critical element in my mind, because ultimately the space is going to shift over time. Right now it's so small because it's just getting started, really. There's no crying need to have a single aggregator that's aggregating all the VCs that are out there, and they're starting to talk about setting standards for compliance, and that's in several areas. We do it a slightly different way. We actually give the B2B customer a tremendous amount of leeway within their compliance, so that they can apply compliance that goes all the way from something that keeps users anonymous all the way to what a regulated entity would do. And every time you're at one of these points along the way, the user is permissioning every single step of this. And I think that that's critical. This is a great question. How many people in the audience think it's important to take control of their own data? Is it enough to make you want to act and go download an app? Or is it something that you're interested in, and if something compelling comes along, you might pull the trigger on something like that? Because ultimately, I think that everyone wants great things, right? And everyone wants this idea of data privacy. I think that for me, the most exciting element of it isn't even the data privacy, because there's so much lack of data privacy right now. It's going to take a while before that has an impact on what's out there about you. But to me, it's the fact that you have to prove again and again and again, sometimes in painstaking fashion and in ways that can take so much time, who you are. I mean, proving who you are for a mortgage or a loan, or proving who you are for some other things that they can take days. Imagine being able to do that with the swipe. That's really where the power is here, and the interoperability of these standards then can populate up so that you can actually aggregate all your VCs in a single wallet.
Well, put lawyers out of business.
I don't know about that. They'll never be out of business.
Right now, I think we're in a little bit of from a product design perspective. And so I think we're also looking at very different sides of how people interact with Web3. And I know
I agree, yeah.
we're at a DeFi conference, so DeFi is going to be the central way in which people are interacting here. But if the future of Web3 is only DeFi, which is kind of mostly what it is right now, the average user doesn't care that much about money on their day-to-day life. They want to be entertained. They want bread and circus. They want to be able to do the basic things that people do online. So I think identity is going to play so much more of a role in that. So right now, I think we're in a little bit of a race to the bottom product-wise. So you look at Instagram, you look at YouTube, and they are actively trying to develop products that copy TikTok, which has so much information about you, which is hyper-personalizing entertainment to I used to work in analytics. The term is addiction. Like, they very explicitly know what they're doing when they're designing products with your data, and they are trying to get you addicted to fire as much dopamine as possible so that you use the product over and over again. And I think in Instagram, you saw a big pushback. People didn't want Reels to be shipped copying TikTok. I mean, people do because it's addictive. Like, it's calling data like drugs, like you said. People love that feeling, but they want actually to see how their family members, they want to see their friends and families, their posts. I think we're going to see people get, going on the drug analogy, people are going to get sick. I think people are physically going to get sick of how hyper-personalized things are and are going to look for splitting up their identity a little bit more to be able to engage with one social protocol that shows them what their friends and family do, one social protocol that's going to show them memes. I think there's not going to be one central player for social in the future. I think people are going to engage with multiple protocols and want to be able to bring their identity from place to place, or be able to bring multiple identities. So like when we're talking about open protocols and open standards in the system, like EIP 4361, I think, sign in with Ethereum. I think this is such a revolutionary, exciting thing where I can spin up as many wallets as I want and just easily sign in with my wallet to any decentralized application. I can have as many identities as I want. So at IDriss, one of our kind of things is we allow people to organize all their different addresses really easily and bring them, I could have my Reddit identity tied with, or, my meme identity or my social identity, and each of those different, but I can engage with all these different protocols with the click of a button.
Yeah.
I mean, I think sign in with Ethereum is interesting. We used to have sign in with Bloom. I mean, I think that can be applied with a number of different solutions. But that type of interaction, I think I agree is going to be critical.
I think, the differences that you're observing here are more of a complementary differences. I mean, they're really complementary and not as much contradiction, because we're really addressing different problems and different applications. And I think having the underlying standards such as verifiable credentials or DIDs, those are the connecting pieces that all the applications will eventually be using, or at least part of these applications are going to rely on these frameworks. And yes, they're going to allow us to take our identity from one place to another very easily. If we don't want to have the same identity, we can have control and sovereignty over that. But at the same time, it's going to provide us with the convenience of, yep, this is already verified. I just have to swipe, and my mortgage is approved.
It's going to be amazing once we get there. I'll tell you. I mean, the ability to just swipe to authenticate with multiple platforms is just, but it's a ways down the road.
I think just from a technological, ideological framework, I think our biggest difference is that I hope for a world in DeFi where I can expose one of my identities that has a level of reputation that's not tied to the rest of my reputation, to be able to engage in certain parts of the DeFi landscape. Like, I would like to be able to engage with certain things in the financial institution in which I have an identity with not all of my reputation on it. Just as much reputation as they need to be able to verify that I can engage in this financial space and transaction.
Yeah,
Well-
same way we are here, like in the real world. You don't share everything with me. You just tell me what
I
I
think-
need to know,
I
right?
think they're kicking us out.
Yeah.
so.
I hope everyone on the panel will be around the conference the rest of the day. I do apologize we only got to have one question in, but thanks for coming out. And by all means, thanks, Ron.